voice that you just heard was mine. My whole life, I wanted to be a singer, a dancer, a performer. I grew up in a musical family, and from a very early age, I felt compelled to perform, to express myself, and to positively connect to and move others. I had hoped I could make my living in the world of opera and music theater, and practiced diligently to get there. However, my dreams were cut short about 10 years ago. As I started to build my career as a professional vocalist, I struggled continually with vocal problems. It turns out that my instrument is prone to injury, and the only known remedy is a delicate but risky surgery directly on the vocal cords, which I endured twice. I will never forget the recovery period, where you must remain completely silent for 2 weeks. And when you are finally allowed to make sound, what comes out is only a tiny, high-pitched squeak at first. And then with 5 minutes of gentle humming and vocalizing every day, it slowly returns to a more normal register. But after several rounds of this, even with a good surgical result, my instrument would be forever compromised. There's a lot of shame associated with having to get this kind of surgery in the opera world, as you can imagine. The question is asked, were you careless? Did you overtrain? Can a company who hires you count on you to deliver night after night? It is almost always kept a secret amongst the singers who've had this surgery. And as a type A competitive perfectionist that I am, I, however, was hardest on myself, that I had been irresponsible and not disciplined enough. But I had come to the edge of something much more significant that would change my life. It is terrifying to lose the means to express yourself. It is deeply human, the craving to be seen and heard, to share your story and to tell your truth. What began as a why me moment in my life made me realize I would need my voice in a different way. The experience of losing it and then seeking it clarified my understanding of what I'm actually here to do. I was meant to utilize my voice, just not as a singer. As I sought a new career, I listened carefully to my mentors and colleagues who saw my love of being in front of audiences and helping others, and who encouraged me towards what would be my new field and my professional home to this day. And that is consulting to organizations about how leadership, which leverages diversity, drives innovation. I spent some time in corporate roles in my new field, and then I decided I could have the most impact from the outside and founded my company, where we could dedicate our energy to building more inclusive workplaces for the future, enabled by all kinds of talent, which will ultimately produce better business results. Every day, my team and I work with our clients to build strategies to retain and develop their up-and-coming leaders. And I have the privilege of knowing certain allies and even CEOs who, as we say, get diversity, like Ernst & Young's former global chairman and CEO, Jim Turley. But there are plenty who still don't get it, and it is frustrating for me to hear how many in today's workplaces don't feel comfortable bringing their full selves to work. For instance, modifying or concealing certain physical or cultural aspects of who we are, like education, appearance, dress, language, or who our significant other is, and changing that pronoun when we come into work Monday morning. We know through focus groups and surveys that this is impacting their ability and, more importantly, their willingness to contribute at work, as well as their employer's ability to leverage their full skills and talents to drive business forward. So this is a very personal topic for me, as it was my story too. During my corporate years, I held back, afraid that I would be judged. We often utilize the concept of an iceberg to explain what this is like. So there are visible and invisible aspects of diversity in all of us, and I am no different. Upon meeting me or working with me for the first time, you might presume my race, my gender, my generation, but you might miss or misidentify the less observable aspects of who I am, like my religion, my educational background, my sexual orientation. I also bring diversity in terms of my cultural attitudes towards things like time management or my communication style. Depending on how comfortable I am in my environment and what behaviors or attributes are valued in my workplace, I might or might not bring more of what has shaped my experience to the workplace, thus lowering my waterline. So the effort required to manage aspects of our identity, our culture, our work styles, and in many cases, filter them out of our professional personas to fit in, can take precious energy and focus away from our confidence, our contributions, and ultimately our careers. When we can work as fully ourselves, we win and the business wins. So one of my favorite quotes is from Marianne Williamson. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So at some point in the early days of running my company, I had to liberate myself from my deepest fear, which meant coming out professionally as a member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. I had come out to family and friends years earlier. However, declaring this publicly felt much riskier to me, as my name was now on the door. These were the early days of my company, and I perceived at least that clients and contracts that could make or break a fledgling company, especially during a recession, were at stake. I had been warned once before that I could never come out as who I am as a performer, that I would be judged as inauthentic if I tried to play traditional roles. And remember, in those days, I knew of no successful out role models in the performing world. I was determined not to let this happen in my business. As I now find myself in a successful and growing company, I finally have the freedom to lead with and from my truest self. So given I am my own boss, and I still struggled with sharing my identity publicly, you have to ask how many in today's workplace are carefully navigating around some aspect of their identity. And make no mistake, this impacts performance. A recent study of all kinds of talent, even straight white men, shows that everyone does something called covering. So covering is not a new concept. A powerful example of it is how, for example, FDR always seated himself behind a table when his cabinet entered the room. Roosevelt wasn't hiding his disability. Everyone knew he was in a wheelchair. However, he was covering, making sure his disability stayed in the background. The study describes the pervasiveness of covering in today's workplace among women, people of color, and yes, even white men. A full third of LGBT talent today are not only covering, but aren't out at all at work. A full third today. And a persistent lack of diversity at the top of organizations isn't helping. Senior leadership today often does not reflect the diversity of our world. And this is a critical engagement factor for all kinds of talent to see themselves reflected. So now more than ever, companies need not only diversity of identity and culture, but diversity of thought, stemming from diverse industries and backgrounds, and to build inclusive organizations where all kinds of people can flourish. But the global business, while it's changing rapidly, organizations still follow these hierarchical management charts that stifle innovation and diverse voices. So these voices have yet to be well represented at all levels of the organization. Of course, to attract this talent, companies must not only understand, but respect the needs and desires of a shifting workforce, and to walk the talk externally as well. So in the age of transparency that we live in, the internal and the external reality of what a company says and does needs to match. So for consumer-based businesses especially, this means respectfully capitalizing on the exponential growth in the buying power of minority communities. Hundreds of billions of dollars in some cases, and growing all the time. The LGBT community's buying power alone stands at almost $800 billion. So I credit my diversity as a woman and LGBT professional, among many other things, with developing sensitivity to the diversity in others as an ally. And with the opportunity I have now to guide and advise large businesses with credibility and weigh in on the future trends that are going to impact the workforce, it has also made me a better leader. When I think about the attributes that are forged through challenging circumstances like covering, those happen to be some of the same attributes that I predict will be important for leaders of the future. For example, my outsider experience, my ability to think outside the box, as having experienced what that's like, which has forged my character, my clarity, my courage. My ability to be an inclusive leader, somebody who welcomes others and values perspectives, respects that, hears them, seeks their stories, respects their journeys. What I've been calling the 3 R's, resilience. Think about the resilience that it takes for many LGBT people, including myself, to come out constantly. That builds resilience. It also builds ability to take risks. And entrepreneurship. So I love this concept. It's in entrepreneurial thinking applied internally in organizations. So entrepreneurs thinking nimbly, creatively, outside the box. Harnessing a powerful community. Many diverse communities have these powerful, loyal, networked communities that will do anything for each other. What role will that play in propelling business forward if we can figure out how to harness that? And finally, the drive to perform. So these are just some, and I urge you to think about what would you list as competencies of the future. And I want to talk a little bit about another concept, the case for diverse-owned businesses, which has been building as well. So major corporations are paying closer attention to their supplier base and questioning the lack of diversity they see. They're beginning to understand that procuring everyday goods and services from small and medium-sized businesses founded and run by those who have forged a different path, and the resourcefulness that has to go along with this, may just be a great source of innovative ideas and perspectives. So obviously, supporting diverse entrepreneurs is a tangible way to give back to communities, investing in them and their economic viability. So at my company, JBC, we're proud to be certified as a woman and LGBT-owned company by the certifying bodies WeBank and NGLCC. NGLCC is the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, and WeBank is the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. These relationships enable connections for us to potential customers who value our diversity. So who's getting it right out there? So companies that center their strategies around 3 key areas that we've talked about today: workforce, workplace, and finally, the marketplace. These companies that get it leverage their diverse employee networks, thousands of employees strong in some cases, to, for instance, inform their marketing and recruitment strategies. So when you see an ad campaign that reflects the diversity of today's society in a way that is culturally respectful, chances are that employee networks from that company contributed their knowledge, their social capital, and their community relationships to make that campaign a reality. So these same employees are likely out at career fairs, community events, representing their brand with pride and vouching for their employer. So you can't buy this kind of endorsement. And when it comes to attracting the best and brightest talent, companies continue to fiercely compete to get high marks on lists like Diversity Inc.'s Top 50 Companies for Diversity. So the presumption being made is how companies do by their talent speaks volumes about how they do business. So if diversity is a priority, it shows up in the bottom line. So consider, companies with gender-diverse boards outperform male-only boards by 26%. Diverse work teams produce results 6 times higher than homogeneous teams, as we heard from the last speaker. And over a 10-year period, the index of publicly traded companies in that list outperformed the major stock market indices by an average of 25%. But we will need more voices, and it starts with each of you. I hope you've realized today everyone knows something about diversity. And while there is still some risk in bringing more of yourself to work, consider the rewards. There are countless inspiring leaders whose stories embody the potential of being bold. These are some of my personal network. My friend, who's a Latino senior vice president from a disadvantaged background, traces his ability to speak publicly and learning how to gain buy-in in the business environment to leading his Hispanic employee resource group. By the way, he moved through 5 promotions in record time. Or a female VP I know without a disability who is now executive sponsor of her company's disabilities network, who has stepped up to learn everything she can to represent this community as an ally, educating herself and her organization in the process. Or my other friend, who's an out gay managing partner who serves big accounts in his company and is valued especially for his ability to connect personally with clients, often gaining their trust on a deeper level. He also continually challenges himself to hold his partner's hand at executive retreats for the firm, where they are the only gay couple. My advice, make yourself uncomfortable every day. Sharpen your awareness of the diversity in you and in others. Be an inclusive leader, and know the business case for how diversity and inclusion drive innovation. Organizations are depending on you. And most importantly, cherish that voice. It is a gift and can be powerful beyond measure. Use it with pride. Thank you.